A lot of the times when I'm coming up with an idea for a tutorial, I end up just jumping into DaVinci Resolve, creating something. Now, I don't know the true use case for something like this. I could see it maybe on like a display in the background of a scene that you would then, composite in. Outside of that, I'm not too sure. Maybe a background for like a music video if you change the colors, something like that. I'm not too sure why you would actually use this, but I did want to teach you guys how to use like particle systems and then use like 3D meshes and using the particles as location data for 3D meshes. So there's a lot of things that I can teach you throughout the course of making this element. And in the future, if you're curious, I ended up working on 2 different projects while trying to come up with an idea. So this is the one that you've seen previously. And then I also created this, and this is like a 3D mesh where the particles are actually being placed on the outside of the mesh, and we're like moving it around and different lighting effects and stuff like that. So we're just going to be working on that first like worm looking thing. I don't really know what to call it, but I broke this tutorial up into 3 different sections based off of what we're primarily teaching. So the first one is going to be solely about the particle system. Then the second one is going to be taking that particle system and adding a 3D mesh to the particles, and then playing around with lighting and shadows and how we would move things around and how that whole process goes. And then finally, we're going to play around with something that's actually unique to DaVinci Resolve's version of Fusion instead of the standalone version of Fusion, and that's using the Resolve effects within the node tree in Fusion. So we'll be playing, that will be the third one. So in the description of this video, there's going to be a playlist that jumps between each one of them. If you do want the project files, they are available on the websites, so you can take a look at that through the Pro membership. If you don't know about the Pro membership, it's where I teach people everything you could possibly think of when it comes to DaVinci Resolve as a training partner for Blackmagic Designs. And there's a bunch of like pre-made assets and stuff like that. But let's get to working on the particle system for this element that we're creating today. I'm just going to create a new project here. Coming down to the little house, we can create a new project, and I will just create a new project. Sure, we'll call it Untitled Project 46. Now, I like to go into my DaVinci Resolve and set whatever my parameters are that I want for my Fusion project. So you can make assets that go onto the edit page specifically for Fusion, like a specific frame rate, but I want everything to be 60 frames per second. Now, the majority of this, once we start to get a little complex, like it gets a little complex, we're not going to be able to play this all back at 60 frames per second. I'm just going to come over here and we're going to switch this over to 60. And in the newer versions of DaVinci Resolve, playback will automatically change to 60. You can also come in here and type whatever you want, but 60 and 60. And now at this point, we can jump right into Fusion and start working. We don't have to make a timeline or a Fusion comp. Once we go into Fusion and start creating, it will automatically create that stuff for us. So let's just jump over into Fusion and let's just pull down a particle emitter, and we'll also get a particle renderer. So these are going to be the 2 key elements that we need for a particle system. Something to actually generate the particles, and then something to render whatever our particle system is. So think of the particle system as a bunch of different elements that are all going together to make a particle simulation. So there's like different forces that we can add. We can attract things, we can repel things, we can have them bounce off of surfaces. If we were to do like, let's say sparks, like for a welding, or we're using a grinder and we want the sparks to bounce off, we would have all of these elements in our particle system, and then they're going to go to a particle renderer, which will then take whatever our system is, it'll make a simulation of it and then spit it out. We can either do it 2D if we just want it to be flat elements, or we could have it go into a 3D system, which then we'll have to, build out a whole 3D environment. So we'll get to that a little later, but let's just work on these particles for now. We'll go right from the particle emitter into the particle renderer. And if we view this, we can see that we're by default clicking on this renderer, we can see that we're in a 3D space. So if we ever wanted to switch between 3D and 2D, we could click right here to switch between those two. So primarily with the emitter, we're going to be setting like the shape of it. So that's going to be like the style, and then the region where we want it to actually be created. Okay, so if we come over here into region, we can see that we have a sphere, right? And so if I make this bigger, we can see that we have these couple little dots in here, and that is pretty much just the area in which our particles can spawn. So I'm just zooming in and out by holding down Control or Command and then using my mouse wheel to go in and out. And now if I hold down Alt and hold down middle mouse wheel, I can rotate my camera around, and we can see that all of the particles are spawning within that sphere there, right? And so if we come back over into controls, we have this number, right? So this is how many particles are going to spawn for each frame. So currently it's 10, so there's probably 10 particles in here. When I come up a little bit, we'll see that we have a lot of particles, right? So that's obviously more than 10. We're on frame 5. So currently there are 50 particles in here because every frame it's going to spawn however many are here. Okay. Down here we have lifespan. So lifespan is what it sounds like, how long a particle is going to live. And the time, the amount that are in there is how many frames from when it was initially created. So if a particle was created on frame 1, and we have 100 frames, at 101, it's going to die, right? So that's going to be our lifespan. We can pick that however long we want it to be. For now, we're just going to leave it what it is. And so now let's go in and actually start to create these, because currently these are just little dots and maybe we want them to be slightly bigger. So let's go over into style. In here we have a couple of different options that we can pick, right? If we pick a blob, then it's slightly bigger. It has like an alpha, as you can see. We can go in and we can do like a brush. We can switch this. We can have it just be a bunch of fish. Very random brush, different fish. Didn't look like it changed. Flake, it looks like some of these are showing up, some of them aren't. So a couple of like random things in there, but let's go to bitmap. Bitmap is cool because now we can bring in whatever we want as our particle. So if we had a very specific shape that we wanted, if we wanted it to be a logo, we could have it be you could have it be whatever you want. Now it added on to our particle emitter a input, right? So let's grab a background. And in our background, let's come over to the image size. I'm going to uncheck this auto resolution and let's just put in here 50 and 50, right? So that we're just saying that the resolution for this background node is 50 by 50. So if I bring it up, whoops, we're just going to click and drag it up to here to release. And we take a look at it, it's 50 by 50. So that's the whole resolution there. I'm actually going to bump this down to 8-bit. Okay, from there, let's just grab a ellipse. We're going to add that in and connect this up. So now we have a circle. So the cool thing here is if we now connect this in and take a look, we can see that now we have balls that have spawned in here. Now these are flat elements. They don't have any depth to them. If we were to light them, you would see that they're all just pointing wherever the camera currently is looking. So now we have just a bunch of dots, right? And if we came into our background and changed the color, obviously that would change the color there as well, right? So there we are so far. Now we have a bunch of dots, right? And now remember that they're spawning within this sphere that we have. So let's go back over to the region. And now if we change this, we can see that they'll spawn in there wherever we want. And if we bring this and make it really small, let's go 0, 0, 0, 1. We'll see that they all look like they're spawning right on top of each other. Okay. Now over the course of time, if we were to change this, so let's come back to frame 1 and we'll hit keyframes for our translation. And that's going to be where our location is. And then we move this, we can see that over the course of time, they're spawning, right? So if I go across here, remember every frame, they will spawn, 10 of them will spawn, right? Over that duration. But because our region is so small, we'll see that they're only spawn within wherever that is located, right? So currently, if I let this go, we'd see that they just keep spawning up here. And then once we got to that 101 frame, we can see that they're starting to die off, right? But they'll obviously just keep spawning, respawning there. So all of these parameters we can keyframe, so we can say, okay, we want it to start spawning and then we want it to stop. So if you wanted all of your particles to spawn at one time, you could have like a big number, like let's say 1,000 particles, frame 1, and then frame 2, we could have a keyframe for the amount of particles to be spawned to 0. And then it wouldn't spawn anymore, but those 1,000 would be spawned for whatever the life cycle is. So at this point, now let's try to get these to spawn and have it just go all over the place. Now we could keyframe this just like we would with any path, but instead of doing that, let's use some clever ways of not doing it that way, but having it look real organic where it's moving all over the place. There's a couple of really cool features that we can actually use to do that. So I'm just going to double click in both of these, or all three of these, to reset them. And we can go into each one and we can add on a modifier. Now a modifier allows us to add a level, so we'll have like a value. So whatever this value is, we can add a modifier on, which will just allow us to change whatever that value is with a completely new set of controls. So let's go into here. We're gonna right click in here and then come down to modify width. Now let's come all the way down to shake. We'll use the shake modifier. And now if we take a look at this, we'll see that it's moving all over the place, but it doesn't look like we have any controls here. But if we look up here, we see that modifier has turned on, but it looks like there's a keyframe. So this just means that there is an animation associated. But if we come into here, we can see that right here, we're working with X offset, and we can see shake on the P emitter 1, X offset. So now these are the new controls dictating the moving here for the X. So we have a random seed, so this is just going to allow us to generate random numbers. So if we have the same modifier, but we want them to be different, we can just change this parameter. And then we have smoothness. So this is going to be from frame to frame. This is going to be a how drastic is it going to change over the course. So if we make it like the number really small, so it's not very smooth, it's going to be jumping within whatever the range is. And then down here we have a range, so a minimum and a maximum. So let's just put in here like negative, let's go with 2, and then we'll just have this as a 2, right? So it can change over the course of 4 different, from -2 to +2. And if I zoom out a little bit and we play this, we'll see that it's going kind of all over the place, right? So that's cool. And we have the smoothness. So if I change the smoothness, right, down really small, it's going crazy. And if I change this to like a 30, we'll see that it's really smooth, but it's still kind of random in how it's moving. So it's up to you. These are all parameters that you can change over the course of time, but let's add it on to these two as well. So we'll come into here, modify width, shake, come into here, modify width, shake. Then we'll come back over into modifiers and let's add the same exact parameters in here. So I'll put -2 and 2 down here, -2 and 2. And so with that, now if I take these random seeds and we go like this, we can see that now we're getting very crazy paths, right? So now let's change this color so that we can actually see this a little easier. We can see that as this is going, it's kind of going all over the place, right? So that allows us to be very random in its position. If you want it to be more random, you just have to come back into the emitter, come back over to modifiers, and we can change this down to, let's just go like 5, 5, and 5. And we can see that it's going all over the place, right? Now, we'll see that if we look, these two right here are, we can see that they are distinct circles, right? So for that frame, if we come back, we can see one frame's there, next frame's there. But what if we want it to have particles in between these spaces? Well, we can do that, but we have to come back over here to our particle emitter. And if we come over here into controls, we have this temporal distribution. Now, they're all at the same time. We could have it random or equal. Now, if we go into equal, we'll see that it doesn't look like anything has changed. Now, there's something else that we would also have to change, and it is going to be in our P renderer, right? And then in here, we have this subframe accuracy. So subframe accuracy, think of it as if we have two frames, what is the accuracy between those? Just think of how many frames are in between the two main frames. So frame 1, frame 2. Now we have those, but maybe we want subframes to be calculated for the distribution to be even across that. What we can do is we can increase this. Now remember, when we go to render this, if we add 10 to here, when we want one frame and we want another frame in the background for when it's solving the particle system, there's going to be 10 frames in between. So you're adding a 10x workload to your overall. So if there are 1,000 frames, well, now there's going to be, 10,000 frames. And, it continuously keeps becoming more and more. So that's something to be mindful of. So I'm just going to put in here, let's put 3. Whoops, hold on a second, down here, subframe. Let's put in here 3. And now we can see that we're getting more frames in between frames, right? So if we take a look here and we go back 1 frame, we can see that there's a little extra calculation going on there, right? But as we go up 1 frame, we can see that it's adding in a little bit in between those 2 jumps, right? So that's just something to be mindful of. And it really adds in and fills it in a little bit more. So now let's come back into our emitter, come back to this region, and let's go back to what we were previously working on, right? 001. And we can see that now we're starting to get this like defined line. Now, if you wanted it to be more than what it currently is, you could increase that. And it's just going to be a combination of how many particles are spawned per frame and how many spaces it can accurately put between there. So it's going to be up to you. Just remember, it's adding extra workload on top of everything. So that's how we would go about doing that. And that's pretty much the gist of, creating this dynamicness to adding in this particle system. Now, the next part that we're going to go into is taking these particles that we have generated, and we're going to leave it the way it is. Oh, actually, hold on. There's a bit more that we can add in here. And remember how we were having over here this life cycle or lifespan? What we can do is we can actually add on a whole nother control here, which would dictate what happened over the course of its life cycle. So there's a couple of different things we can do. We can have it change like its color, we can have it change its orientation, but we can also have it change its size. And so that's something that we're going to do. We're going to have it kind of like pulse over the size. Now, this is something that you might do. Let's say you have like a particle, if you're doing like a firework, and over the course of time, typically like fireworks, they kind of like fizzle out. So think of like the particle getting smaller and smaller until you can't see it. So that might be something that is of interest that you might want to do. In here in style, we have a size. And so we have the size over life. And so over the course of this, if we went like this, we could see as they get older, we can see as they're getting older, where did this originally start? So it originally started here, and over the course of time, they're obviously becoming bigger and bigger, but the size isn't that big. So let's change this up a little bit to like 0.3 so we can see this a bit better. Okay, so we can see like as this goes up, let's go to 100 because that's the life of these. We can see that, they're right here is where they're currently the new spawns, and as they get older and older, they're kind of fizzling off and getting smaller. So if this was playing in real time, as it's moving, this is going to be a whole tail, and the tail's going to be, kind of following it because they're behind. They're going to be getting smaller and smaller, if that makes sense. Not really explaining this very well, and I do apologize for that. But we can also do like unique things where we can kind of have it go like this, and it will give like a pulsing kind of look to it, right? So over the course of time, they're getting smaller and bigger and smaller and bigger. And as we would play this back, now let's come back over to our frame accuracy, and let's bump this down to just like 2 for now and see if we can play this back. But we can see like over the course of time, they're just kind of going bigger, smaller, bigger, and smaller. But if you watch the tail, so let's come back to the beginning. If we watch originally where it is right here, we can see that they're now disappearing, right? So that's a big portion of how this whole thing is generated, because we're going to be also using the size to dictate how the size of the 3D mesh that we're going to be connecting to each particle. So that's going to be something else that we're going to be working with here as well. So I think that kind of covers everything that I remember adding in here. Remember, this subframe, the more we increase this, obviously the longer it's going to take to simulate the whole particle system and, you know, add additional renders to it. It's kind of like if you've ever done anything with the motion blur and you increase that makes multiple steps. It's kind of like the same thing there. So just something to be mindful of in here. And throughout this, a big thing that I also wanted to say to do is right clicking in here, we're going to turn off high quality, and we're also going to turn off motion blur. This will make your system render back the majority of this project very, very quick, or I should say quicker than when it's on normal quality. So that's going to be something that you're going to really want to make sure of while we're going through this. So, yep, that's going to be it for this particular segment. Now, I said in the description, there's going to be a link to the whole playlist. There's going to be a link to the playlist that is going to go over each segment. So this was the particle segment. Next, we're going to be doing the 3D. And then finally, we're going to be working with different effects to kind of build this whole effect out. So hopefully you guys jump over to the next one, join me for that one. I also want to let you know about the website. If you do want to know more about DaVinci Resolve, now this is only going to go over a very small segment of DaVinci Resolve, the YouTube videos, but if you want to know everything DaVinci Resolve, like tens and tens of hours of content, take a look at the website. I have full-blown courses that you can actually become certified in DaVinci Resolve. Take a look at that. I also have pre-made assets there, titles, transitions, bar charts, infographics, that sort of thing. Have all of those available over there. But with that being said, actually, you know what? I'm also going to be including the final project files, if you want to go through those, that I initially showed at the beginning of this whole tutorial series. I'll have those available on the website as well. So take a look in the description for more information to all of that. But until the next tutorial, I'll see you guys over there. My name's Justin. Thanks so much for watching. Until the next one, guys. Peace.